Super solo mode activated. At least I sure hope I'm on stream right now. Pretty sure I am. Let's see. I am on. Hey. Sorry, it's very difficult to juggle everything all at once. No, I'm just kidding. What's up, everybody? It's been 2 weeks. A lot has happened in 2 weeks. We've got a MLS is back tournament, which we already knew was going to take place, but now, hey, we have a schedule. Sweet. What's up, Mark? What's up, AJ? What's up, Nest? And anybody else who's tuned in. So we have MLS is back tournament schedule out. We know which group we're in, which is group E or F. I don't know the letter, but I do know that our opponents are LA Galaxy, LAFC, and Portland Timbers. Which I actually, we were discussing it 2 weeks ago, myself and Mark, on the show, and I kind of mentioned how I wanted, part of me wanted LAFC in our group, and if LAFC was going to be in our group, then why not have LA Galaxy in our group? Because we know we can beat LA Galaxy. Something. That's amazing timing. I really. Oh, good, it's back. So, anyways, it was pretty fun. So let's talk about why I'm okay with LAFC in our group. I've mentioned this before, and I want to repeat this. LAFC in our group is really good for us for one big reason, which is that at the very least, the first couple of rounds of knockout rounds, it is highly unlikely we would have to face LAFC. Now, yes, that is putting the cart a little bit before the horse and saying we're pretty much assured that we're going to make it to the knockout round. But I will say this: of the three teams, or the two other teams, LA Galaxy and Portland Timbers, of those two other teams and ourselves, we have the highest percentage, according to most places that track that kind of thing, to actually progress to the next round as the second team in the group, which is good. Which also shows that there is a belief among a lot of people that two things. Number one, Orlando's heat and humidity plays into the Dynamo's favor. And number two, that the Dynamo actually this kind of builds up well for the Dynamo to play in this kind of tournament right now. We've seen how good they can be in the Open Cup. We saw it literally just 2 years ago. So we know that they have the talent and the capability. This will be the true test, I guess, in a way, to see where they are at this point. And again, the benefit of having LAFC early in very first match out of the gate, actually, is the fact that A, you get them over and done with, and then B, you kind of know what you need to do to clean some things up and move on. But the other thing is, imagine if we do beat LAFC in the first match. LAFC is going to come in, they're going to be rusty, they're going to be out of sync a little bit. Sure, we might be the same things as well, but let's think about it positively. We have a possibility, if we beat LAFC in the first match, to truly run the group. We could come away with 3 straight wins, which sets us up amazingly for the knockout rounds. So with that being said, it's obviously interesting to kind of really take a look and see the tournament schedule, to see what teams are lining up against what teams, how things are going to progress moving forward, and really what's next, beyond just this initial group stage. So that's so good. The hard thing about not having a partner is that you don't get to take those breaks without stopping the show completely for a few seconds. So I mentioned that we have the group stage, and our group is LAFC, LA Galaxy, and Timbers. The important thing also is that all 3 of our matches in the group stage, again, you play each of the teams in your group with the exception of Group A, which is a totally different situation. But we play those teams once. And all 3 of our matches in the group stage are all at... help me out here. It is... I have it right here. Why am I trying to think of it? We play them at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. And that'll be on the 13th. We start with LAFC. Yeah, George, solo. Very solo. So the 13th we play LAFC at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. All of our matches are at 7 p.m. Central, which is kind of amazing. The only thing I dislike is that all 2 of our 3 matches are on FS1, and then our match versus Portland is actually on ESPN2, which is kind of cool. That's also an 8 p.m. kickoff, or 7 p.m. kickoff Central Time. And that's on July 18th, and then July 23rd, which we are one of the final 2 matches on. We're basically the last group stage day There's only 2 matches, and it's our group is the last group to play. And so we have LA Galaxy to finish out the group at 7 p.m. Central Time, and then the other match is Portland versus LAFC that day, and that's the later match. So I thought it was kind of cool looking at that schedule and how nicely that really sets up for the Dynamo. Just A, it's at a time that they're normally comfortable with. It's their normal time. B, they don't have to worry about crowd noise. They don't have to worry about kind of that away atmosphere of being on the defensive. Just in terms of fan support. I think that actually benefits them very strongly against Portland, a team that really plays best at home. And I think this team has already proven they can beat the Galaxy, like I said before. So it just shapes up real nice. Yes, that's not a lot of time off between matches, 13th, 18th, and 23rd. It's basically 4 days rest, 1 day recovery, 3 days rest between each match. Which is fine, but my concern is when you go from the 23rd, if we do make it out of the group, let's say we make it out of the group as a second place team, then it's likely we're either playing on the 27th or the 28th, and that is still it's one less day of rest, and then if we win on the 28th, then we could be playing anywhere from the 30th to the 1st, which again is that's 2 or 3 days rest, which again we're shortening the rest as we go along. Which, not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely compacting everything, at least until you get to the semis where you have between the 1st and the 5th, which is at least a few days, and then the 6th is the second match day. And then the final is on the 11th. But, I mean, I'm just going to put it out there that, again, positioning ourselves, if we can come into this, if we can go out there and beat LAFC, again, they really don't know what to expect. Nobody does. This is a team that has played really well at home. They've played solid on the road. They may very well be missing Vela, may possibly be missing more players. It's going to be a situation where I feel like the Dynamo just set up really well for this. Also of importance to note, there have been a number of MLS teams that have already reported that they've had positive COVID-19 test results. They've done the proper isolations and things like that according to the CDC or WHO or NHS or whichever health organizations recommendations you follow directly. NYCFC had a positive test for a member of its sporting department, but they've since then, and that was back on March 19th. They've had multiple positive tests among players and team staff since then. FC Dallas have had the one announced positive test, and then they've had 2 more positive test results that have yet to be announced. Then we've had Colorado Rapids today announced that they've had a positive test. We had Seattle, who's had a positive test, and New England Revs, who've had a positive test, but neither have reported it publicly. They've not put it out there publicly at this point. So there's a lot of teams, obviously, who've not, who've had positive tests, all things considered. And I talked about this before that. You can do all of these measures, but we have to remember we're putting players into a position, or the league is putting players into a position where they're basically together for long stretches at a time, not just match times, but just throughout the day. Players on the same team are going to be together regardless. And I know MLS has this thing that, we'll do, team building days or whatever, where, they'll get to do some sort of activity. That's great. But I mean, that's a full month and, a couple of days. Really, it's more like a month and a half where they're just together and there's, it's them in isolation. That's hard psychologically and mentally. So it's going to be very interesting to see in that regard what teams come out of this tournament looking stronger and what teams maybe start to show fractures. I think we're going to see opportunities where some teams start to show frustration. Teams that have a star player that maybe is not performing up to their best, or a star player that maybe is taking minutes off, during practice type of thing. I don't know, maybe a Chicharito might be a perfect example of this. A guy that maybe feels like he's here to retire. I think you're going to have some younger players and even some veterans that are going to take, they're going to take umbrage with that. Especially in this type of tournament, especially in this type of situation where, again, they're around each other way more than they would be any other time during the year. And that includes, away trips, because MLS does try to schedule it where away trips are no more than 3 matches in a row. So maybe it just, again, going back to it, this is a month and a half, if not a little bit longer, that a lot of these teams will be together. It really is going to make or break a lot of teams just in general. And I think we've seen from the Dynamo that they have the mentality to be able to approach this like a family, like a a brotherhood, if you will. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how it all shakes out. I'm very high on the Dynamo, as you guys can obviously, I think, tell at this point. I'm kind of curious what kind of odds do you guys have on the Dynamo making it out of their group? How far do you think they're going to get? Go ahead and share that in chat. I'm definitely watching chat. I see Pat. I see Cisco. What's up, Cisco? I see George. Obviously, I mentioned him a minute ago. See Mark, of course. AJ, Nest. Appreciate all you guys joining. It's tough going solo, man. But, at the same time, the show must go on. That's what they say, right? Also important to note while mentioning positive COVID-19 tests for players and staff, 8 clubs in MLS have confirmed on the record that they have not had any positive tests. That's the Chicago Fire, Columbus Crew, Houston Dynamo, let's go, Minnesota United, Real Salt Lake, Orlando City, which I think is interesting, San Jose Earthquakes, and Sporting Kansas City. So we know Orlando is actually one of the cities right now that has one of the higher rates of positive tests, positive confirmations right now. So it's kind of interesting to see them being a team that has come back and confirmed that they do not have, on the record, that they do not have any positive tests. Which is also even more interesting considering the Orlando Pride had to withdraw from their tournament. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Their tournament in Utah because they had so many positive tests and so many players coming up with positive tests. Interesting times to say the least. Well, the thing is, he would have been tested, George, and so George thinks maybe Marcelo Palomino had it in preseason. He was out sick. I'd give you that, except he had to be tested at that time, and his test came back negative. And the fact that the Dynamo have gone on record to say they've had no positive tests, that includes all the way back to when this all hit back in early March. And in January, I think we're pushing it a little bit to say in January, early February, a player would likely have it. We were not seeing enough of a spike, I think, here to really worry about it. With that being said, he obviously could have, but I think we would have seen more prolonged symptoms from him if it was something like that. Pat apparently wants to join me on the air. I'm going to preface this by saying that Pat's opinions stated on the show do not represent the opinions therein of Generation Orange, its producers, its directors, its broadcasters, or its commentators. With that being said, let me bring Pat in here. Well, hello there, Pat. You have to unmute your mic, buddy.
Oh, it is. I just forgot about the 5-second delay.
I'm not solo mode anymore. Thank you, Pat.
So,
Appreciate it.
I did make the joke that I was going to talk about board games, but I'm going to actually try to contribute for once.
Now, see, you say that, but I'm actually a board game aficionado, as you are well aware. Tabletop gaming is like my jam. So if we go down that road, don't be surprised if I start pulling out questions like, okay, so Dynamo players, we're going to start talking about what class they would be in standard D&D, or if we're playing what board game would players be best at. But I think we'll start with COVID-19 stuff related to MLS and MLS's back tournament. So what MLS knowledge would you like to contribute to the discussion today?
So what I want to contribute is not really with the COVID stuff, but I wanted to hijack the podcast a little bit to talk about the Athletic and their coverage, especially after the MLS had their memo leaked about how they hate the Athletic.
I am personally am a huge supporter of the Athletic. I am a major fan of Sam Stejskal, who does a fantastic job covering MLS and has obviously built up his insider network of sources tremendously. As Pat has alluded to, there was the leaked memo, which I find, by the way, that in and of itself is the best part about all of this. There was a memo that MLS sent out to their their team personnel and their front office personnel for the league, saying basically don't leak stuff or you'll be subject to disciplinary actions. So the memo was leaked, which is again a memo saying don't leak stuff. Um, and so it was leaked of all people to Stam Stejskal, and he then shared it on the Athletic and has continued to do so, basically looking dead at the eye at MLS and saying, "Bring it on! You're not as strong as you think you are. My sources, I'm not going to out my sources. They have no concern about being outed." Type of thing. And I think it's amazing. I really do. But on that same note, one of the very few places that covers MLS to the level that it deserves to be covered, and really not even just MLS, but soccer in general, is absolutely the Athletic. They also cover, of course, the other top sports, out there, top sports leagues, top sports teams, but their coverage of MLS is just second to none. And the fact that they do this with a strictly online platform, and the fact that they're doing this on basically the coattails of newspapers and digital or non-digital media, basically struggling heavily, just goes to show that the guys running this thing really understand how to reach this this current medium or current craving that fans have for sports coverage.
Yeah, what I really love about them is they actually support RSS feeds, which only like 12 people use. So I can actually get Dynamo news within the second they post it, because it just pings right my phone, my computer, my desktop, my shoe. It's amazing.
And interestingly enough, along the same lines, for those techies out there, their app does actually support push as well. So they push notifications on your phone, which I appreciate, because I'm not one of those 12 people that currently still use RSS feeds. I got away from that back, I think, in like 2009 or 2010. Almost a decade, actually a little over a decade at this point. Wow, it is 2020. Oh, good to know.
But yeah, since that memo was posted, like the Athletic was one of the few that broke the news about the USSF disbanding the academy program. They did that amazing survey, which like a few hundred people did, which was shocking for a paid newspaper, online newspaper.
Yeah.
They also did the background reporting about the Atlanta players being unsatisfied with playing behind closed doors, and they were nervous about how everything was set up. And the Athletics coverage of the players union stuff was just amazing.
And that's not a surprise, though, because like I said, I know Sam has done a really good job building up his network, and I know that he's got network connections directly with players, especially players that have retired, and players that have retired have their connections with players that are still active. So it's not very difficult to get the information, especially in a situation like that where the players association, players union association, they were looking to produce some leverage in the discussions that were ongoing, negotiations that were ongoing around a temporary CBA extension, and I felt like they did that was honestly, to me, that was one of those marquee moments of this season in general, where the players kind of said, "We're done taking your crap. Like, this is what we're demanding." It's and then Sam ran with it, and he was like, what they're demanding is not that crazy. What MLS owners are doing is they're basically making themselves look like total dicks, publicly. And I was like, wow, Sam, you definitely know how to like dig that dagger into somebody's back. And again, I think some of that came out because, like you alluded to, MLS did release that memo. Basically, and again, I didn't mention this, but what's important about that memo as well that MLS shared with their personnel and front office staff across the league is that the memo specifically called out sharing information with the Athletic. It wasn't just that they said don't share information. It was don't share the information with the Athletic. Like, we know that they're the number one, group going after information right now, and yet the Athletic has not lost. They haven't skipped a beat at all. They've kept right on the same pace, if not picked it up. And it's clearly working. I mean, their readership numbers are solid, and it's no surprise there's not a better coverage medium out there. And they're just doing a great job, and the writing is solid and good quality too. It's hard not to like the Athletic when you're kind of, especially here in Houston, when we're so deprived of good quality Dynamo and Dash coverage in general.
So I got two things I want to bring up just to make it look like we're not shills for the Athletic, because we don't want the people on Twitter to yell at us.
I'm going to say this: the Athletic. If you're looking for sponsorship opportunities of a Houston Dynamo and Dash based podcast, I do happen to know one that would absolutely, 100%, absolutely get on board with that. Just throwing that out there. But go ahead, Pat.
So the first thing I wanted to bring up is so with the union stuff with not only MLS but MLB, but I feel like this was a turning point with like social media and fans, because I know with the MLS when they were making statements and the players union were making statements, it was very similar with the MLB where everything was being posted on social media and Twitter, and reporters and fans were just dumping on the owners. And I feel like it's a combination of the fans wanting to see games played, but the reporters also wanting to have a job. So
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
just, it feels like it's a turning point for the billionaires. And as you, as someone who works into the media, do you feel like this round, pandemic aside, just feels different? Like negotiations for the future of sports could change?
I feel like we can't exclude the pandemic and the effect that COVID-19 has had on the psychology of athletes in general. You're seeing a lot more, and beyond just COVID-19 and the pandemic, I think we're also talking about the state of society right now.
Oh yeah,
You look
fans
at
chomping
athletes,
at the bit for sports.
you look at
Yeah.
athletes across NBA and WNBA, and some of them are very strongly talking about that they're going to sit out a year or two so that they can spend time, building up and supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, and other, other similar types of things related to that. And so it's just, I think, again, you can't, as much as I like to say, well, let's take a step back and let's try to extrapolate and narrow down what the, possible cause of this is. In this situation, all of these things feed into it. And there's obviously some core issue, which is that athletes now, and society, I think, backs them up. Athletes are no longer just athletes. They are people. And people who use their platform more often than not to support causes they believe in. And so I think with that, they believe in themselves. And so it's not surprising to me to see players across the board, across all sports leagues, standing up for themselves, especially in this situation where, and I'm going to move away from MLS for a second. I'm going to talk NBA, MLB, NFL, etc., where players have basically really played hard-nosed negotiation tactics with the various leagues and the various owners of their sports teams. Again, I don't think it's surprising when you start to think about they've just been faced with this very real situation where not only are their livelihoods and their lives on the line, but the lives of their family and friends are on the line. And it's a total shift in mentality. It's a total shift in psyche. And so these athletes who typically live their lives in such a way that they believe they're immune from a lot of physical things other than on the court action where they get injured, they're starting to understand and realize that there are very real consequences to their actions off the field and away from their stadium, away from their teams. And I really feel like it's the first time we've had this sort of thing coupled with all these other things, coupled with, athletes kind of being aware of the situation going on in society. And, there's definitely a cause and effect there. There's definitely it bolsters them to, support the causes, but at the same time, the causes then turn around and support them back. It's a give and a take, but in a positive way. It's a good question, though.
All right, yeah. I feel like some of it probably has to do with fans chomping at the bit for any sports, but it was also nice to see them side with the players for their health and not for their interest in seeing people kick a ball for a while.
I think I was more surprised at how many people were willing to say, I would rather wait in another month, another 2 months, and let players, feel comfortable coming back. Then there were people out there saying, well, players have to come back because we need sports. It was less about people needing sports and more about people understanding, again, that sports and athletes in general, superstar athletes even, are people. They're not just athletes. They're not just the the 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4 hours you see on TV every week or every few days. They're much more than that. And I think we've seen a lot more of the kind of the personal pieces come out too, in terms of coverage and writing, where more and more players were being covered on a personal story level, talking about their past or their experiences that they've had. And those have been really good reads because it connects you with those players in a different kind of way, in a very real way, where it's a very bonding experience to read their experiences at that kind of level where it's personal.
Okay. And then, so my next question, it's going to be a bit of a long one, and I do apologize because it might be a bit leading as well. But this is going to be related to the tournament. So, two things. The first thing, Florida announced today that they're going to stop announcing their ICU bed numbers so that they can meet the requirements for the next phase of reopening, because that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And The Athletic, going back to them, posted up an article, which I believe you mentioned earlier, that, there's many teams with positive COVID results, and they're just not going to say anything. So, with both of those information, what are your thoughts about this tournament seeing completion? Do you feel like it'll end poorly like Djokovic's tennis tournament? And to continue the question,
it's a good question.
Do you think the MLB and the NBA are actually using the MLS as like the canary in the coal mine? Like, do you think they deliberately held their tournaments later to see how the soccer guys will handle things?
I don't. I think MLB specifically, you look at their situation and it came down to the players applying pressure to owners, and they just agreed like a day ago to finally do this thing. So it's not like they agreed 2 weeks ago. They agreed, earlier this week. So I think MLB is kind of a different situation. I think the NBA, I think they pushed theirs back as much as they did. Because they actually, and you could kind of see it a little bit in how Adam Silver has gone about things. He's very, very specific that he does want to protect the players a little bit. I think you see the difference in that. And I think the NBA were at a point where they had already played the bulk of their season. I know this. They had played the bulk of their season, so the owners were not losing nearly as much money and had not left as much money on the table by not playing right away as MLS has. MLS had only played 2 matches in their season, and MLS organizations and clubs in general rely so much on the money that they get from ticket sales and from in-stadium merchandise and concessions and things of that nature, that they were operating at a loss even going into the season, let alone missing this huge chunk of time that is their season. The NBA, we're talking, they probably had a month and a half, 2 months left at most. They literally had like 5 games left before the end of their season, going into the playoffs, and then they had playoffs after that. So for them, this little bit extra, it's just a delay. It's not a, yes, they're having to push back next season, but that's a different story. This is happening, like I said, 2 weeks into the MLS season, where owners had not recuperated any of the money that they've spent. Their venues are sitting completely empty, and I just think it's a different situation in general. MLS owners rely on the money they get from their teams in order to keep the team afloat, whereas I think NBA teams aren't nearly in that same boat where they're valued high enough that they could afford to kind of wait a little while and deal with things that way as well. Plus, I think the difference is also in the contracts of players, being able to say, oh, well, I don't have to pay James Harden for 2.5 months. I mean, that's a hell of a lot better than saying, oh, I don't have to pay Morrow 2.5 months. It's just it's a different income bracket in terms of how much you're talking is value lost.
Yeah, fair point. I'm going to sound like a shill, but I do remember the Athletic article where the owners said that they'd rather not play at all than play in empty stadiums because of the money loss involved. Because, MLS doesn't have the TV contracts the other sports do. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember reading that too. And the reality is most people don't realize that's the case. And it is true. And there was an article that came out by The Athletic just last week, or I think even earlier this week, that said, MLS teams in general operate at a loss. And it was really talking, I think, about the NWSL side of things, but they mentioned that. And it caught me off guard. I've thought about it before and I've heard it before, but it's kind of one of those things. It's like, okay, yeah, that's a negotiation tactic, but they weren't involved in any negotiations at that point. There was nothing on the table that the owners had to gain by putting that out there at that point. Yeah, okay, we operated a loss. It's just like the Athletic were like, it's known that MLS teams and MLS owners operate at a loss, except for the, top 8 teams in the league, your LAFC, your NYCFC, your teams, Seattle and Portland, the teams that tend to do really well, money wise in terms of the attendance that they have and those types of things. But even then, you think about it and it's like, not every MLS team is selling out their stadium, and really only 3 or 4, maybe 6 now at this point, maybe 8 year over year are selling out their stadium. So that still leaves you roughly 20 teams that aren't. So 20 teams, let's say even half of those are operating at a loss. That's 10. That's over a third of the league at this point is operating at a loss, and yet these teams are valued. Clubs are valued at over 100, 200, 300 million dollars. It's kind of insane to think the valuation is as high as it is when these clubs are operating at a clear and obvious loss.
Yeah. And I'm going to be a good temporary co-host and segue into the next topic you want to talk about. But you mentioned that NWSL is operating at a loss. And one of the uproars over Twitter was the DC reporter, I believe his name is Jeff, off the top of my head.
Jeff Reuter?
I don't remember his last name.
No, you're not talking about Jeff. You're talking about Stephen Goff.
Yes,
Stephen Goff.
100%. So
I know my media guys from MLS. Don't challenge me.
I'm not going to. I know what his avatar looks like. I just can't remember names. So, but he did report that 2 of the NWSL teams are going to meet up at an airport and share a charter flight. So that already says
Washington and North Carolina, the Spirit and North Carolina Courage are going to meet up. North Carolina is going to fly to Washington, and then Washington are going to join them on that same flight and fly the rest of the way to Orlando, or not Orlando, to Utah.
So that shows the budget constraints that league is facing. Pandemic aside, I mean they already had troubles with their budget without a pandemic, but yeah, that shows that they're willing to share a charter flight from teams from different cities. Oof.
I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, or first 2 seasons of the Dash, that they were roughly $500,000 in the hole. Dynamo ownership was basically writing off the Dash as a loss year over year at about $500,000. That number may be a little bit lower now, but it's definitely NWSL teams, and it's not a knock on NWSL or the ladies that play in that league, but they operate at a loss. I mean, it's not a money-making league. Owners do not get in that league to make money. That is for sure. Owners get in that league because they either care about women's soccer or because their fan base of their men's soccer team cares about women's soccer. And so, in that regard, now, on that same note, to segue one more time, talking about NWSL, it has come out and leaked out that NWSL is considering and likely to announce that LA will be the next expansion team coming into the league, and it will not be a team owned exclusively by one of the 2 LA franchises, but it will have an ownership interest from one of the 2 LA franchises. My guess is LAFC, where Mia Hamm is a partial owner.
Yeah, but outside of that, it just shows, how much they want to save money to have 2 teams from 2 different areas converge onto a flight. And this is where the segue happens, because that tweet became very interesting because the Orlando Pride told a bunch of their players that they're now under self-isolation for the tournament. And this is all of them, including some of them that had to travel overseas and come into the U.S. And then you got the shenanigans that occurred. And this is the segue where I point to you to have you take over and run this show. Because it's a great story. And you can tell it better than I can.
So, yeah, I mean, the Orlando Pride, I struggle with this one because they had players together playing and practicing together. And then, they had to announce that they had 3 players specifically that, had contracted COVID-19. And when they considered the amount of time that it was going to take for their players to self-isolate, those 3 players in particular to self-isolate, plus the additional players who've come in contact with them to self-isolate, and then the timeline for travel to Utah, it wasn't working and it wasn't going to work. Now, obviously, we've had players now from Orlando Pride that have come out and they've, voiced their frustrations, but at the same time, they've erred on the side of caution alongside their ownership and have said, if this is the case, what is being reported is the case, then we agree that this is the best course of action. We want to play because we know we love playing, but we also understand that we're in a situation in terms of in terms of the pandemic, in terms of COVID-19, that playing may actually be, a true life or death situation. And I mentioned it early in the show. That's a completely different situation when you're an athlete. I mean, you're talking about, playing a sport that, yes, you do earn money, or turning around, and simultaneously putting the possibility of contracting the virus that could possibly kill you, or sitting out and self-isolating for a few weeks. It's a decision that really, I know, weighs on the minds of some of these players, MLS or NWSL or otherwise. I almost feel kind of the same way watching Bundesliga or the Premier League, seeing some of these players that, they're going out there and they're playing, but you could tell that they're not 100% mentally at that same place that they would have been if this hadn't happened. You've seen teams that normally would not be shaken, go out against a team that they should absolutely rout, and they struggle. Perfect example is Liverpool's first match back. So it's not, I get Orlando Pride doing it, and I think it makes the most sense, but I'm shocked that we haven't seen more NWSL teams follow the same path. And I do have genuine concerns that it only takes one or two people who are asymptomatic and don't know they have it to ultimately end up spreading it to a large number. And they're in a situation where, sure, you can say we'll self-isolate, but you self-isolate an entire team. I mean, they just did that in Russia. There was a Russian team playing in their league that they had like 3 players, or I think actually they had 8 players that tested positive. And so they self-isolated, and everybody they came in contact had to self-isolate. And by the end of it, they had no team. So they just had a bunch of high school players go out and play their last, actual league match. Of course, that team got routed 10-0, which is no surprise. But it's the fact that they, instead of canceling the match or postponing the match, they just went out and played it with high school players. And, it's all of these things feel so foreign, so different. But the fact is, this is what these players, these athletes in these leagues right now in the U.S. are facing. It's what they have to deal with. It's what they have to think about.
Yeah, and the crazy thing was, it was 6 positive cases for the Orlando Pride. All were asymptomatic.
And so it was 4. No, it was 10. It was 10 total. It was 6 players and 4 staff is what the numbers actually shook out to be. But that's still like.
Oh, yeah.
So 6 players, 4 staff. I mean, 6 players is, or maybe it was 4 players and 6 staff.
No, you're right. No, it's 6 players, 4 staff. I have the article pulled up now, and every single one of them were asymptomatic.
Yeah, your roster size for NWSL is like, it's not real big. 23, 24, 25 players at the deepest. And so, you have 6 of those players. That's a fourth of your team. That's a quarter of your team that tests positive. And these, again, were players that were practicing with the rest of their players. What I find almost disheartening and disconcerting about this is there have been players, the veteran players in particular, who have come out and said that, and have alluded to kind of in hidden. I'll let that be shown, Sergio, here in a second. Thank you for that comment. Do appreciate the word shite there instead of the actual word. It's great British usage of the word. But the Orlando Pride had players that were out basically not not quarantining, not self-isolating, not protecting themselves. And this is the result. And there are veteran players that are extremely pissed about it. And I can't blame them. But at the same time, if you're a veteran player and you see that going on, or you hear about that going on, I guarantee you there were discussions about it in their group chat, because every professional club now has a group text chat or otherwise, so that their players can communicate, together to keep on the same page. And somehow nobody knew this was going on, and nobody spoke up to say anything about it. Or if they did, those players really were going to really going to say, no, we're going to go out anyways. I find that hard to believe, especially if it's a veteran player that you respect. Saying, hey, maybe we should hold off, do a few more weeks and then we can do this and then it'll be good, that sort of thing. But either way, it still impacts the Orlando Pride. I think it's important for people to remember outside of sports that what you do has an impact on more than just yourself. And this is a perfect example of that where, these players probably thought, well, even if I get sick, it'll just be me. And now it's not just them, it's the 6 of them plus the entire rest of the team who don't get to participate in this once in a lifetime opportunity, tournament to go and potentially lift hardware. And now they don't have that opportunity. Plus there are 3 U.S. women's national team players now that have said that they're not going to go play. Tobin Heath, Kristen Press, and Carly Lloyd have said that they're not going to play. And I think Ashlyn Harris said she's not going to play either. But
Mallory Pugh as well.
Mallory Pugh came out and said she's not going to play. I know Chicago said that not Chicago. Maybe it was Chicago. Chicago sending Julie Ertz, Morgan Bryan, basically all of their U.S. women's national team players are going to go play. I know the Dash don't have any players that have said they're going to sit out. So, again, it's just all of this. Hey, Jake, you just missed our NWSL discussion. All of this stuff right now is just real interesting. And actually, Jake has an interesting perspective as used to have an interesting perspective. I guess not quite as much now. He used to be an EMT, but now you're a security guy. You're a big security guy. Moving on up in the world. Just kidding. But, he's got the perspective of a responder and a frontliner. I'm kind of curious, Jake, how do you feel when you read Orlando Pride veterans talking about their younger players that had gone out and maybe did some things that they shouldn't have done, and the end result is the Pride having to withdraw from the tournament? While he's thinking about the answer to that question, guys, what other questions do you have for me? Do you have for Pat? Thanks again, Pat, for joining me. We've got about 18 minutes. Like I said, I'm only going an hour tonight just because it's just me, and Pat did join me, but that was totally last moment, unexpected. But what questions do you have for us? I'm happy to answer questions, happy to chat, happy to talk. I know Cisco's got to have stuff. Congratulations are in order to Cisco as well, who has found himself a lady friend. Yeah, I'm totally putting it out there on the air for you, buddy. Although he's put it out there publicly anyways. It's on Facebook. If you don't follow him on Facebook, what are you doing?
And while we wait, I'm going to counterpoint on you saying that the teams might have had like a Discord or a chat, because Sydney LaRue went out on Twitter like on full blast. And Ashlyn Harris actually made a recent post while in line to get tested, saying that she was completely frustrated and scared and sad and just angry and just Ashlyn Harris things. And Lord knows, Ali Krieger's brother, Kyle Krieger, is lit on Twitter right now.
Can
so
you blame him? I mean, I can't blame him at all.
It seems like, if Ashlyn Harris, who is, just from what I've seen from her from the Women's World Cup, she's front and center. She's talkative. She's with people. If she is caught off guard and frustrated and sad and scared, it kind of seems like this was done on the down low. And I feel like this seems like it was done like in a 1980s terrible frat boy kind of movie where a small group snuck off to just rebel against the man and the orders of the self-isolation to party.
You make a good point. I'm going to counter that and say, doesn't it fall on the veterans? And again, it's not like these players were in preseason. They hadn't even made it to preseason yet. They hadn't even started practicing when this all hit.
Yeah.
Isn't it on the veteran players to preempt that to begin with and say, hey guys, I know that it, as someone who is viewed as a leader on this team, and you don't say that part of it out loud, but as that person, hey guys, as Darwin Quintero, I'm telling you guys on the across the rest of this team, we're not going to go do this stuff. I haven't got to play with you guys hardly at all, but I'm telling you right now, we're better than that. And I guarantee you those teammates are going to listen because they respect you. And so there's one of two things going on. Either those players don't respect those veterans, or those veterans didn't step up and say anything about it.
That's honestly 100% a good point. Yeah, it might have been a combination of either no respect, or they figured there'd be common sense during a pandemic that they didn't need to say anything. But as we're finding out with masks and other basic common sense, they shouldn't have made that assumption. Yeah, there should have been a speech at practice going, Here's our expectations. Here are all the sacrifices we're making. Let's go. Yeah,
And I mean, it could have been
very
something
fair point.
It definitely could have been something that those players went and did prior to practice. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, it's still something that as a veteran on that team, you know the players that are on your team at that point. You preemptively send the text message out, or you preemptively send the message out. I mean, again, they're your teammates. Take a little bit of responsibility as a team leader. And say, look, I know that there are temptations out there to go and do these things. You're going to get hit up by guys that are saying, or girls that are saying, hey, come hang out, or non-binaries as the case may be, that are saying, hey, come out, we're up at this club, come hang out with us, or we're at this beach, come hang out with us, whatever it is. But you have to be smarter than that. You're a professional athlete now. You have to act like a professional athlete. And I feel like the players specifically that have come out and voiced their, aired their opinions and voiced their concerns about this, from Orlando specifically, I almost feel like they did that because they kind of knew that they dropped the ball by not saying something themselves. Now, certainly these players should have been smart enough to say, man, there's a pandemic going on. I really shouldn't be out there doing this. But these players most likely were the ones drafted directly out of college, and probably were still in college mentality, still that college lifestyle, still have that opportunity. So as a veteran player, you know better. Why not take it on yourself? Why not take that responsibility instead of expecting your team to do it for you or your team staff to do it for you? Take a little personal responsibility, show some leadership for those players, and say, hey, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go that route. I know you're probably getting hit up about it, but let's be smart. Let's not do it.
Okay, yeah, I 100% agree.
And I think Jake makes a really good point. You look at the Houston Dash, Daly and Campbell, along with Clarkson had the team following the rules. They didn't, it was, and I guarantee you, Daly and Campbell were right there before the first practice, before they got together, when this all started, and said, look, ladies, we're not doing this. We're going to be good. We're going to follow this because this is our year. I guarantee you they were leveraging that as team leaders in general to say, this is not going to happen on our watch. We're not going to do this. That's the difference between a team leader and somebody who's a leader by default. Big difference.
And I'm okay with the Dash leading by example for the rest of the league. Not that I'm biased.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And really, honestly, there are not two better ladies to do it than Rachel Daly and Jane Campbell. Let's be real.
So I'm not seeing many questions on the chat, so
you're not wrong.
I'm gonna segue you back to the MLS tournament, and I wanted to discuss with you about something Alexi Lawless posted about 2 weeks ago.
All right.
And he basically posted that the Bundesliga, since they're one of the first leagues to come back, he said that the Bundesliga was proving that without fans, the home field advantage is dead. Because I think in the first 2 weeks, like 2 home teams won. One of them probably being Bayern, because they came out of this destroying everyone in their path, which was amazing. So what I'm saying with that one is basically you're a lot more knowledgeable about players and, fitness and all that than I am. So with this being the case with, the Bundesliga, one of the top tier leagues, with home field advantage being destroyed, do you feel like with this Orlando tournament, Houston may have the advantage because, we're born and bred out of the humidity and the shitty heat, and Orlando, which I can attest to, is the exact same damn weather as Houston. And
I do feel that gives us a little bit of a benefit. I mean, of course, you'll have people that throw back. Dynamo have not, at least especially in recent memory, been a very good away team. Okay, that's fine, that's fair. But these
and that's why I brought it up, because now there's no home field advantage anymore. It ain't away games, so that Achilles heel might be gone. Maybe
it's really truly neutral site, and I do think that plays into the Dynamo's benefit because I feel like the Dynamo struggle because of opposing fan support as much as anything else. I do think that Tab Ramos is the type of coach that will be able to keep his team in line during this period, and I do think Tab Ramos is the type of coach that this type of tournament suits him, because he's had experience with tournaments similar to this, not league tournaments, but in terms of international tournaments where you're taking a team that is still getting familiar with themselves and you have a very short period of practice time before it, and you're throwing them into a tournament where they're going to face off against teams in the exact same boat. Some teams better, some teams worse, some teams right along the same line. Tab's got
Oh,
Tab's got
well,
experience with that.
well done. Yeah, I was about to bring that up. I was just like, we might have an advantage with him because he used to be, he's a national team coach where it's just like, oh, you guys are here for 5 days. Let's do a 4-game tournament in 2 weeks, which is
Absolutely.
national team in a nutshell.
Yeah,
So well
it
done. You
really
took
is.
one of the questions out of my mouth. And the other one I was going to bring up is, since, like I said, you know more about stuff like this than I do. Do you think Tab Ramos will be better at fitness and conditioning? Because what we're seeing from the Premier League and God, Lord knows Arsenal, these players are dying when they're having to play 90 minutes all of a sudden professionally. And do you think we could have an advantage of that, or do you think other teams could have an advantage over that? Do you think that fits in the Tab Ramos's style?
I struggle with that because I honestly don't know, and I don't think it's a Tab Ramos question. I think it's our fitness and conditioning coach, which I generally think our fitness and conditioning coach has struggled the last few seasons.
Agreed.
I think the example is we've not made a full 90, it feels like, in 3 years at least, type thing. But on the flip side of it, they're not going to have to worry about travel once they're there. They're there.
Yeah.
They're not going to have to worry about, they know already how many days rest they have between these first three matches. They know who their opponents are. Those things aren't changing. They know where they're going to be. They know that things that are going to happen in between. Um, and I think the one thing tied to fitness and I'm going to talk about injuries in this same breath is the Dynamo get back a couple of players and don't have to worry about injuries by the injury, by having this period off. So getting their full, and we finally get to see Darwin Quintero, Albert Elise, Memo Rodriguez, other players I can't think of the top. Oh, Mauro Manotas, Christian Ramirez. There we go. I couldn't think of, and Thomas Martinez for what it's worth. We get to see these players finally play together. All of them play together. And I've been waiting for that. I wanted to see, and I've said it, I want to see when these attacking players are on the field together. I want to see an opposing defense stop them because that's a huge order, a huge tall task. And Darwin Quintero is definitely, game to score goals. Albert Elise definitely game to score goals or make assists. Mauro Manotas definitely game to score goals or make assists. Christian Ramirez definitely game to score goals or make assists. Memo Rodriguez, no problem scoring goals or getting assists. So, Tomas Martinez, sometimes. But, it's still that they've got enough offensive talent to really make problems for other teams. And when you combine the offensive talent with the coaching rapport that Tab Ramos has as a coach, and his understanding of the game at a very fundamental level, I think this team is going to surprise those that kind of have shrugged the Dynamo off in the past. I think this Dynamo team has a very real possibility to destroy some teams that should beat them, air quote, handily. With that being said, Jake mentions he hopes MLS doesn't cancel the tournament because of the Orlando Pride incident. I don't think MLS will. I'm more concerned about the NWSL tournament in Utah at this point because you've already had one team withdraw. You have another team withdraw, and that tournament's really looking bad. Tab Ramos must have the lads following protocols to the teeth, absolutely, and I know he is. Orlando City team has the home advantage because it's their home city. I disagree with that. They have the advantage of knowing the weather and kind of playing in that. But it's not their home stadium. It's not their home field. It's not where they practice. Their fans won't be there. It is as close to a neutral site as you can get while still being in the same city. And they're not going to get to live at home. They're going to be living in hotels the entire time as well. So I think they lose a lot of that you normally get with a home field advantage, where you get to be at home, you get to see your family. They don't get any of that. It's an away match for them, away matches for them regardless. Jake also says, I think both the Houston Dash and Dynamo can win the whole damn thing. I think the Dash really can win the whole thing, and I think the Dynamo are positioned to do the same thing. And none of us would complain if both of them were to go out there and win the whole damn thing. Clarkson and Ramos prepared our teams to the best they could. Any injured players are back and look like they're in form. Agreed. The only exception for the Dynamo is Bisama, who's still going to be out with an injury, though he is getting a lot closer. He still probably has a couple months left to go before he's back. And then George says SB Nation has Dynamo at plus 6,000 odds in winning the tourney. I mean, SB Nation is not exactly a coverage group that I really. He says DraftKings has them at 6K. You know, it's one of those things where it's hard to predict this tournament in general, and those odds are based on early bettors. Nobody's betting right now. They're not going to bet until they're really close to the tournament because there are players that are going to withdraw. And so you're probably looking at a few hundred people that have bet at this point on their teams in particular, and that's why the Dynamo are at plus 6,000 odds to win it. What's the lowest? I'm assuming that's LAFC or similar type of team, probably at close to like plus 1,000 or plus 500, something like that.
And
Probably like plus 1,500 is what I would imagine.
and to cut in, like with what you said and what Jake said in the chat, yeah, I kind of feel better about the Dash's odds now because, yeah, apparently, they stepped up telling the players, hey, let's get in line, let's get ready. And I don't follow the other teams on social media, but I do follow the Dash. And they've actually had like quarantine videos and series on Twitter and Instagram where they're showing players quarantining together and just exercising and having fun and actually contributing to social media about how they're taking this pandemic seriously and how they're taking the training seriously and all that. I feel like the other teams probably are doing something similar, but at least with the Dash, like, yeah, apparently the captains have stepped up and talked to everyone. And Lord knows we haven't had high profile players going, nah, we out. So, and soccer is definitely a mental sport. And Lord knows these tournaments are going to be a lot harder mentally on people. Just, everything's going to be in the back of their head. And without us having players dropping out and with our social media actually embracing the quarantine lifestyle, maybe mentally we'll be better prepared along with physically. And yeah, that could give us better odds.
Absolutely. So George says LAFC plus 350, Toronto at plus 900, Atlanta plus 1100, Red Bulls at plus 1400, Frisco at plus 1600. Like I said, those are early odds. I suspect we see those change within the next couple of weeks before the tournament actually starts. I guess next 2 weeks. We technically have about 2 weeks until the tournament starts. So it's going to be very interesting to see those changes and see those lines shift as the tournament gets closer. I do feel like plus 6,000 for the Dynamo is actually pretty good, pretty solid. May put just $1 down on that one at this point because $1 wins 6,000. Let's go. Maybe even just $1 on every team because even $1 on LAFC to win at 350 means you're positive more than you've put in by a long shot. But I digress. So
I want to say I want to be a good co-host, and I see that we're near the top of the hour. So I want to end it on a really fun note and ask for your opinion on Kubo's tweet about I can't wait to come back to the MLS. And is he talking about the Dynamo? Is he talking about playing? Is he talking about being a weird Beckham-like owner? Like, have fun with this. You got 2 minutes.
I got a minute and a half, but that's okay. Kubo, if he comes back to the league, he's coming back as a substitute player at best. No team is going to sign him and put him in as a starter. He's not played superbly where he is right now in Liga MX, so there's no reason to think he's going to come into MLS and suddenly light it up either. I would be highly shocked if the Dynamo took another flyer on him, even if he came in at a very low rate. He's a player that's burned himself of bridges here. And frankly, I don't think he's going to have an opportunity anywhere else. I don't think any teams care enough. The fact that we couldn't even trade him within the league for anything of value says a lot about what teams felt about him before. And frankly, he hasn't changed much since then.
Oh, I 100% agree. I own a Kubo t-shirt. I just want to know, what do you think his intentions were with that tweet? Like, does he just overvalue himself a lot? Is he a narcissist? Like, what's going on with that?
He's a narcissist. No, he's absolutely a narcissist. Guys, with that being said, it is 1 minute till, maybe a little less now. Make sure you do us a favor if you are watching. Go ahead and hit that like button, and that follow button, that share button, that subscribe button. Whatever button is there, go ahead and do that. Does us a huge favor. Also, if you can share us out on social media, that's hugely appreciated. Guys, we're at 60 followers, or we're at the last time I checked. If you could help us grow that, if we get to 100, that means we get to have a Generation Orange gets to have a custom URL for YouTube, which means youtube.com/GenerationOrange or something similar, which frankly, I would love to get a URL like that for Generation Orange because that would be amazing. With that being said, thanks for joining us. Pat, again, thank you so much for joining me. It made the show go a lot faster. That first 10 to 15 minutes was a little bit of a struggle, but once you jumped in, it flowed.
Yay!
So definitely appreciate it. And if Mark ever has to bow out, I'll try to ping you and see if we can get you in again because that was good. Guys, again, thanks for joining and have a great week. And Nest, that's it. Mic drop.